There are companies that will post jobs online with no intention of hiring for them. They just want to see what the market has. It's a legitimate thing I don't like, but it is something that companies do more often than people would think.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we'll talk about the challenges that job seekers face from economic and technological issues to tough hiring practices. We'll also cover strategies to overcome these obstacles and help job seekers stand out in their applications. Joining me is Tyler Morgan. He is a former recruiter in finance, IT, and customer service who now helps job seekers through consulting. Tyler, thanks for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
I want to start out by mentioning some of the challenges that facing job seekers today, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. There's pay, which is probably the number one challenge in that companies often do not pay enough for the jobs that they're hiring for. There's level of experience for entry level jobs. Sometimes companies require extensive experience and degrees for low level jobs. There's also lengthy recruitment processes and times, depending on the industry. For example, I know people who want to get into law enforcement that it takes about a year, half a year to about a year, and that's because of the screening and training process. And some people don't want to or can't wait that long for a job. There is age bias, gaps in employment history, and how long you've been with a job, or not having the right degree or certification for the job, and others as well. So, with the need for workers in every field, especially nowadays, why do companies expect job seekers to meet every criterion, especially when it comes to outdated concerns like gaps in employment or time spent at a job?
Um, I mean, I couldn't speak to that 100% only because I'm not someone who believes that a gap in an employment should be held against someone. But I will say that just from my experience, not only in recruiting, but meeting other recruiters online, that I feel like it's very, very common if a company works with a recruiter to be able to expect the world in a handbasket. They feel like because they're paying a premium for this service, they should get the quote unquote perfect candidate. So I think when it comes to companies reaching out to recruiters or agency recruiters or whatever the case may be, they just feel like they deserve that because they're paying for it in their minds. I also think you alluded to it a bit when you mentioned age bias. I think that there is just a natural bias with a lot of hiring managers. Maybe it's because they had a really bad employee that had a gap in their employment once, and so they think that that's the standard. Or it could just be a bias that's been introduced by the industry, which causes people to think that is less of a candidate, so to speak, which again, I don't agree with, but unfortunately have definitely heard of and seen more times than I would like to admit.
You had mentioned the idea of an X mark being a red flag for recruiters. How does that get introduced into the recruiting world or within industries? How exactly does that happen?
To be honest, I think the best answer I could give you is an assumption, and I think that it's just a lack of it's a lack of communication and almost like a sense of greed on the behalf of managers. So I think about there was an example of there was a job posting, and you could probably find this online, but in the tech world, there are quite a few different programming languages like Python and many others. There was one that came out, I believe it was from Google or someone that worked at Google called Golang. And there was a job posting that said at the time they wanted someone with 10 to 12 years of Golang experience, but the language itself had not even been out and available to the public for more than 6 or 7. So they were actually asking for something that was literally impossible for the general public to possess. And I think that that's the poor communication and the greed. the hiring manager says, "Oh, we want to go do this thing. I want 10 years of experience." And when you try to reason with them, they may not be willing to do so and say, "Nope, 10 years is a minimum." So I think I would honestly just say it's a lack of information, a sense of greed that you can get whatever you want, and maybe a little bit of ignorance to the job market.
So I want to get into that a little bit later on, but first, do all employers use recruiters to find workers?
No, some employers use what I call, or most people call, agency recruiters, where it's a independent third party that they pay for the service. Some companies have in-house recruiters that do the job for them, and then some companies, hiring managers, just or find that person through some means of networking.
Okay, so is it for both blue and white collar jobs?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen jobs that are just above minimum wage, and then I've seen jobs upwards of 300,000 a year annually in the U.S. that all have recruiters assigned.
And is this a standard in pretty much every industry?
Um, I can definitely say it's the case in, or it's very common in finance, information technology. I think I would say it's probably pretty common in I've seen it in the manufacturing and healthcare industries as well. So I would guess it's in pretty much all of them.
Okay, so besides applying for another job, what are some of the things that job seekers are doing or resorting to when they're passed up for a job?
Ooh, any number of things. Could be leaving negative reviews to vent on a company, or trying to reach out to someone to let them know how dissatisfied they were with the process. There are some people that will try to muscle their way in and get a little bit aggressive, saying, basically threatening legal action. Um, there are also people who will just resort to trying to do their own thing. So switch into a new industry. Maybe they don't want to, but they don't have a choice. Or starting freelancing, or any number of things just to try to make ends meet.
I want to go back to something that you were saying earlier about negative reviews. And do these reviews have any impact on corporations? Are companies looking at this and reacting to what employees are saying? And are they taking notice of it? And if they are, what are they doing to change things?
To be honest, I would like to say that every company looks at it and says, you know what, we need to make a change. People aren't happy. But to be honest, I feel like nowadays it's more common for people to leave reviews because they know it'll solicit a response. It's just not the response they want. So, I guess to answer your question, hopefully in the best way I can, I would say that companies see it, but their goal is, in many cases, how do we get rid of it, not how do we procedurally address this in the future to ensure it does not happen again. So I think for some companies, they have a legitimate customer focused mentality, and they say, you know what, this is a problem, we do need to fix it. But there are other companies that basically just say, where's the rug and how do we put it over whatever this problem is. So a lot of people know it'll solicit a response from a CEO or a hiring manager, but it's ultimately probably not going to get that person what they want.
In your experience working with job seekers and working on their resumes or presentations, what have you seen or what have people discussed with you about their challenges?
I think there are two challenges that are really just the top of my mind and probably always will be, because it's impossible to advise people on. But I would say the first challenge is landing an interview, period. And then the second challenge is getting any kind of feedback about why you've been rejected at any stage in the process. So no one ever gives you any feedback on why they have decided to move forward, even if you never got an interview. So you don't know, is it the formatting in my resume, the content? Did they find someone better? Was the job closed? Is there no budget? Anything could happen. You have zero visibility. And then, same thing with the feedback. I think there's such a fear of litigation in the industry that you're most likely not going to get any kind of feedback on anything that you've said or done during the interview, because there is a fear that the candidate will retaliate and say the company had some form of bias.
I want to revisit something you had mentioned earlier about processes and technologies. Job seekers might not have the credentials or be able to keep up with new technologies and processes in their jobs. For example, there's a lot of talk about implementing artificial intelligence in the workplace in different ways. Since these technologies are so new, job seekers often have little to no training or experience with them. How can companies balance their need for specific qualifications with the reality of workers' actual skill sets?
Oh, I love that. Um, I think that ironically, I'm probably going to reference what we talked about a little bit earlier, the main issues in the workplace right now with that disconnect. So I think that the one thing most recruiters wish that companies would do is allow them to provide input into what they're seeing in the market. So if a CEO says, I want someone that has XYZ credentials, and then the recruiter says, I'll try, but I can't guarantee it. That recruiter should be able to find candidates they think are a great fit, but may not meet those qualifications and take that back to the CEO and let them know. And the CEO should listen and say, you know what? I get it. I can't afford to pay this person, the ideal candidate, that salary. So I will discuss with these other candidates that you have found, and basically just making sure there is that realistic expectation. If they want something that is not literally possible, like the example I gave earlier, experience on something that can't exist, then they should take notice and take feedback of that. And I guess I would just say that they need to be open minded towards what they want versus what they can get.
And with regards to that, how are companies or how can companies expect experience for positions involving new or untested processes? How are they filling those positions if they're filling them at all?
Um, Honestly, I've seen a wide range of different solutions. So I think one of the things a lot of people don't realize is how jobs, to answer your question, how jobs can be filled when they didn't get selected. So if I apply, it could be that 100 other applicants also applied and they simply found someone who's better. Could also be that the budget was canceled and so that job is no longer hiring, which I've seen. And it could be that the company is required to post the job online, but they had someone else in mind, but they're required to post it online before they can hire someone from within their organization, which some companies are required to adopt. And the last thing is they don't. There are companies that will post jobs online with no intention of hiring for them. They just want to see what the market has. It's a legitimate thing I don't like, but it is something that companies do more often than people would think. So if you look up all of these companies that have all of these jobs and then look at the fill rates for them, there's not going to be a one to one match. So I think that's also something people should think about.
How can job seekers learn more about these processes?
To be honest, I would say conversations like this. I mean, you have to meet people who learn about these situations or see them on a daily basis because most companies probably aren't going to share anything that they're doing that could be perceived as negative to the general public. So, as a CEO of a company or a hiring manager, you wouldn't want to tell someone, yeah, we have 50 job postings, but we're only going to hire for 10 people. Or we keep jobs open year round online, but we have no intentions of hiring. It's just in case we need to let someone go. These are real situations that people go through, but they're not going to share unless maybe you have a partnership like working with them as a recruiter or a hiring manager. So I guess I would say to answer your question, it would be just having communication with people regularly in the market and hearing and learning about what they do.
This might seem like an elementary question, but how do companies benefit from these processes?
Well, I think the first thing is it's a sense of curiosity from the company because it doesn't cost them much if anything, to post these jobs online. Some boards will basically say, here you get 12 postings a year or a month or something like that. So it doesn't hurt the company to take it down. It doesn't hurt them to keep it up. So I think that partially it could just be laziness. Part of it could be curiosity, like what is actually out there. And sometimes I think that companies may even use this to determine if the market has something for them for a opening that they're considering. So if I'm a tech company and I have someone for frontline technical support, but I want someone for a second level, but I'm in a really remote area. I could post online and see, okay, who out there meets these criteria, who applies. And then I look at the applications and see that no one's qualified. As an organization, I may say, okay, you know what? The market doesn't have what we need right now. Let's just close this down.
With that said, how can job seekers trust that the jobs that they're applying for are legitimate or will even be there given these practices?
That's a tough one. I honestly struggle with that myself. I guess I would say that the first thing is you have to spend a lot more time looking at these job boards and paying attention to the actual organizations. So, an example being if you see that a company is constantly reposting the same job, but maybe it's not a large company, chances are they're posting it because they want it to continue to appear at the top of the job listings, but they haven't found the candidate that they want. So that might be a company that you may not want to apply to for that reason. Their hiring practices may be a bit questionable, or their standards may be above what the market has to offer. I would also say just doing research on companies and seeing how often are people starting new jobs at that company on LinkedIn or announcing it or something like that. Just seeing like does all of this action from that company have a reaction, like applications, referrals, jobs actually being filled? Outside of that, the only other thing I could think of is websites like Glassdoor online, where you can go and find reviews of interviews from staff or prospective staff, things like that.
So there was a CNBC article from February of this year that talked about how, despite a strong economy, because we're always getting a jobs report, if you will, of a growing number of jobs that are being put into the economy, that job seekers still feel discouraged because they weren't getting hired for jobs. And one person in particular in the interview was laid off from a management consulting job back in 2023. And by the time the interview, they still hadn't found a job. Now, according to the article, they had applied for a considerable number of jobs. And again, this is from a CNBC article from February of this year. The article also talked about how workers were frustrated and burned out on job seeking, which does happen. It's a reality. And now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in March of this year, there were 5.5, or there were reported 5.5 million hires. So, where's the disconnect?
I think that there'd be a couple of different places to look for it. So, the first thing that comes to mind when you say something like that, when people are talking about applying to, I've heard of people applying to 500, 800, 1,000 plus jobs and hearing nothing or getting nothing. I personally would love to see some kind of a consolidated statistic about the number of jobs posted to the number of jobs filled, because I think that might shed some light on basically just we know that there are plenty of people out there that want jobs, and we see plenty of jobs being posted online, and we hear all of these statistics, but we don't know both sides of the equation. If we know that there are 1,000 jobs posted a day, and we know that at the end of the month only, let's just say, 1,000 jobs total were filled, the question then becomes, does that mean that there were 2,900 plus openings that they couldn't fill, wouldn't fill, didn't want to fill? So I think that there are some additional numbers that we could probably find, but it may require finding statistics from every job board out there to help us kind of determine where is that disconnect? Like, what exactly, like, what, I guess they would just say, what exactly does the company want? What does the market want? I think we have to understand both pieces of that puzzle.
This is something that you had mentioned earlier. In the reality is that sometimes, like you said, more people apply for a position than expected, and out of all of them, only one can be selected. Or there are times when, after interviewing, a company decides to hire internally, or they reimagine the job or the position into something else. So, so that people have to start the process all over again. What respite is there for job seekers when this is the case?
Um, that is another very, very difficult one. I mean, this is something that I've personally struggled with, and I've heard many people struggle with. I've helped people with creating resumes, with doing mock interviews, with researching, writing HR documents. I mean, I think that if anything, one thing is just that you're not alone in this issue, and hopefully people can find some solace knowing that it's not them specifically. Just because you aren't finding a job doesn't mean that your resume is bad. It doesn't mean you're bad or your experience is bad. It could mean that that job was literally never getting filled to begin with. It could be that they just found someone that had one more week of experience than you. There's any number of things that I think people don't realize when they say, you know what, I've submitted my resume to 1,000 plus jobs. Well, that doesn't mean that 1,000 employers have looked at your resume. It means, in my opinion, a very small number have actually looked at it. And if people want to kind of confirm that, you can go on some job boards like LinkedIn and several others. When you type in the name of a job, you can see how many applicants have applied. If that number is greater than 100, chances are very slim that your resume is even going to be reviewed. So you may receive a generic email that says, "We've reviewed your resume. We regret to inform you." Doesn't mean that they've actually looked at the resume. It could just be a button to reject all candidates. So I think the only bit of solace I could hopefully provide would be, it doesn't mean it's you. It means that chances are it's just the market. It is a trend for everyone. The good news is that trend historically tends to balance out. I just can't say when.
How does that balance out?
I think there becomes a point where the power is with the job seeker and not the company. I think when COVID started, everything changed. And we got to a point during COVID where I think we saw a massive influx in companies going to remote work, and companies doing better than they thought during the pandemic and increasing the salaries for these individuals. But then, as we got further into the pandemic and near what I guess we can call the tail end of it, we started seeing, okay, well, that was when the job seekers in some industries had the power. They were able to say, you know what, you're not going to find anyone else like me, or I demand a higher salary, and they were able to get it. But then the pendulum began to swing in the opposite direction to where now companies are saying, not everyone's remote anymore. We want you on site, or we don't have the money that we did during the pandemic. Any number of things. And then again, once the labor forces at those organizations dwindles, swings back in favor of the candidates, and they will then have the ability to demand more of a premium for, or basically just what they deserve for their work.
Is it possible that the process has become so formalized and systemized, if you will, that as a consequence, it has become systemic to eliminate job seekers?
I wouldn't just say possible, I would say almost guaranteed. With the implementation of artificial intelligence, all of these different automatic screening processes, it took what little human element was left in many of these job searches and applications. It basically removed it. There was already minimal human interaction to begin with, but now you can be rejected for having a resume that didn't match the criteria because someone used artificial intelligence that wasn't fine tuned to find that resume with that experience. Any number of things can happen. And it could be the fault of the hiring company, but it'll be brushed under the rug because they may not even find out about it.
Why hire or put out a job posting if that's the case?
That's the way it's always been done. It's a phrase that comes to mind for me.
Regarding remote work, and I want to discuss work environments, which is a major issue for employees, excuse me, especially on social media where they share their discontent. Some common complaints include micromanaging bosses, stale work environments, low pay, or feeling mistreated or undervalued at their jobs. How can companies address these concerns to help employees stay at their jobs? And are there any specific strategies or initiatives that you've seen that have been particularly effective?
Sure. I mean, honestly, that's probably one of my favorite things to hear from companies if they're willing to actually follow through. So, I've worked a ton of different companies where some with great cultures, some with terrible cultures. And I would say that if a company or hiring group or manager is serious about making and improving the atmosphere, the culture, the whatever, it will be received well typically by the employees as long as they can see a genuine effort. The problem comes in when companies act like they do and they bring in, I don't want to say subpar gifts and make it sound like I'm not grateful, but they may bring in things like that are of no value to the employees or the staff. Like, let's just say they have a pizza Friday. That's great, but what if half of your staff is lactose intolerant? Like, are you paying attention to each of those individual people? Are you actually offering them things that they want or use or need? And I think the biggest mistake companies make is they don't get to know their staff and think about, what can I give this person? Is it a bonus? Is it a raise? Is it additional paid time off? Is it leaving early on Fridays? At the end of the day, people typically get a job or keep a job for three things, in my opinion: money, culture, and room for growth professionally. If you aren't hitting those marks with them, you need to find a way to do that. So, when it comes to the culture, sometimes that could be work life balance. Sometimes it could be giving them less time at your company, more money. It could be something simple: finding out everyone's favorite coffee order and just showing them that you care and being involved with them. So I think management need to figure out what they can do, whether it's in the budget, the hours worked by the employee. They need to figure out what can they do to actually, like, physically be allowed to do without the company falling apart. Then they have to connect with the staff and find out what do they want, and then they have to merge the two. So I guess I would say that's pretty much it. I think that there are hundreds of ideas you can find online, but ultimately companies seem to go straight past that and run for the easiest, cheapest method that they call a benefit, which could be requiring staff to meet up for, let's just say, a out of office event, but it's during their free time. May not be well received by staff, but the company thinks this is team building and they have it in their head. So I hope that answers the question. I think that you'll know if you pay attention. I just don't think many companies do.
In your experience, based on what you've seen, is this lack of connection a consequence of how corporations are structured?
Um, I personally think that it's a consequence of management. So I think that companies are structured with an ability to change and to do what you can almost call breathing. When we see massive influx of new hires followed by all of a sudden laying off half your workforce and then repeating the cycle, companies allow for that change and flexibility. Management don't. So it's management's responsibility to instill loyalty in their team, make them like the atmosphere. Again, Not every company can give every employee a raise, and we all understand that. The problem is there are so many companies that can and choose not to.
So I want to divert a little here. I just learned about this, but in January of this year, there was uproar over a video from a company called Internet Brands, which is the parent company of WebMD, if you're familiar with them. Now, in the video, for those who haven't seen it or know about it, Internet Brand CEO Bob Briscoe and some of the executives at the company express in varying degrees a directive to get workers back in the office from working remotely. This is while the song Iko Iko is playing in the background, and the song itself is a pretty happy tune from New Orleans that's been covered many times. Now, the video ends with Bob Briscoe pretty much ordering people back to the office. And people dancing around, employees of the company dancing around, before a screen shows up that says, "We mean business and don't mess with us." The video itself is filled with the cliches of the corporate office world. And people on social media and pretty much online raked the company over the coals for how they presented the whole thing. Um, how do you think incidents like these impact employee morale and perceptions of company culture, let alone a desire to apply and work for such a company? And are companies aware of workers' frustrations with the system? What's your take on the whole situation?
Yeah, a good bit to unpack, but a lot of it I really like to discuss. So, to answer the last question first, I think that companies are very much aware of the employee's stance. I have seen companies who, with my own eyes, not naming names, but there have been organizations, plenty during COVID, who have told their staff who have requested before COVID to work remote, and they said no. It's just we need the culture, we need the morale, we need you in here. Ultimately, staff know the majority of that time it's so that they can be monitored. Then COVID happened, and those companies' revenue increased with the same staff. And the culture doesn't matter because most of the companies didn't care about it to begin with. So their revenue increases. So everything that that company said before is basically it can't be justified. You can't say anything about the culture because the revenue increased and most managers only care about the bottom line. And it, in fact, sways to the side of the staff who said, I can do my job and then some when working from home. So now that COVID is kind of in the rearview mirror, these companies are saying, well, we need to come back to the office. And the staff are saying, I did, I hit all my marks and then some. I've personally increased my productivity at times from home. Don't get me wrong, there are people who take advantage of this system. There are videos, unfortunately, online of staff who go work from home and then brag about how they sleep on the clock or how lazy they can be and all of the work that they don't do. So ultimately, I think we end up having the same struggle that we've always had in the workplace, but the argument has changed. The problem management has is they want a sense of control over their staff and the most productivity possible, but they don't always want to listen to staff. The issue is staff now know that it is possible to work from home, do everything they were doing previously, but not waste money getting ready for work, driving to work, and doing all of these things. I could save anywhere from 30 minutes one way trip, let's just say hour and a half a day on my commute while still putting in a little extra time at work by working from home. So I guess what I would say to kind of sum all this up would be I, I I think that like I said, the argument is the same. It's what it's always been. But we're getting to a point where I don't think that companies care. In your example, where they were putting on that music in the background and the things that they're saying, I haven't watched it personally, but the way that you've described it, it sounds like they made an intentionally controversial video to show that they don't care about what other people think. This is their view. And ultimately, I think we have two choices. You have the choice of the employer to allow remote work or not, and you have the choice of the employee to work there or not. Companies have every right to require their staff to work on site, but that does not mean that they have the right to stay in business if no one wants to work there. So I think that people have to understand that if the staff can work from home and you as a manager hire the right people who do the right job, there should not be a reason to go to office. But if you're incapable of doing that, you need to acknowledge that you cannot manage a remote workforce, or maybe your job just can't be done remotely, and you need to address that. So ultimately, I guess I would just say that people need to understand both sides of the argument and make an educated decision.
In your experience helping people with their resumes and trying to get work, what have people said to you with regards to remote work or working on site? What have you seen? What have you heard?
Yeah, I think that the biggest concern that people have is wanting to work remotely so that they can be at home for their family, whether it be spending more time with their kids or because they can't afford childcare, or maybe they just don't have access to it. So they have a system in place where maybe they can work remote and that way there's no shift change, and then their significant other can take care of the child while they're working or something like that. But it does provide much more flexibility to allow for things like that. So I think that whether it be that or the lack of a desire to spend the money on gas and the time commuting, but remote work does seem to be the strong preference for most people.
Reverting back to something that we were discussing earlier, just to kind of flow into it, there is an issue regarding using platforms like Workday for applications and screening, and some of the issues that job seekers have had with them. For example, there's the complexity and user experience, where many applicants are finding the application process on Workday, for example, complex, excuse me, and not user friendly. The use of automated filters, which Workday's automated systems can filter out resumes based on certain keywords, which may result in qualified candidates being overlooked if their resumes aren't perfectly tailored in the job description. There's also been reported accusations against Workdays of using artificial intelligence to discriminate against applicants on racial grounds. There's also a lack of personalization, which the process can feel impersonal, as candidates may not have opportunities to directly interact with recruiters or personalize their applications. Technical issues. Users sometimes experience technical difficulties, such as difficulties with uploading documents or just navigating the platform. And rounding out is that the whole thing is time consuming. The requirement to create detailed profiles and enter information manually can be time consuming, particularly if candidates are applying to multiple jobs. With these challenges in mind, how are companies or are companies addressing this issue? And what are some job applicants doing in response to these challenges?
So I can't speak for all companies, but I would say that I think that most companies are not doing anything to address this. And the reason I'm saying that is we're seeing an increase in the number of complaints of these occurrences. So people adopting systems that used to require a resume, and then you do this thing where you read the resume. And now we don't do that anymore, and we say, okay, I want you to submit your resume, but then I want you to fill out this entire application, and then this questionnaire, and then this questionnaire. And it's totally redundant. So I would say that I don't think companies are doing much. If anything, they're actually making it worse by adopting these systems instead of telling these software providers to fix it and then we'll adopt it. And then to the second part of that, I think that it's causing job seekers to try to find ways to cheat the system just to be seen. People are using ChatGPT to write their resume to include keywords because they don't think that they can write their resume themselves anymore because they don't know how to beat the system just to be visible. So I think people are getting desperate. They're hiring resume writers. I've had people request many different resumes, and I try to tell them I don't recommend wasting all of your money on that, when in reality the answer may just be applying to more jobs. It's not what people want to hear, but don't go throw hundreds or thousands of dollars on new resumes if you have not yet confirmed that the resume is the problem.
We've talked about the challenges that job seekers experience when looking for work and how companies can frustrate the whole job finding process. Now, what can people do about it? What are some of the strategies that people can use either to land a job or get noticed in their application? Anything to get job seekers to become job finders.
Yeah, I would say that I think the number one thing is not to get stuck in a specific way, whether it be because that's what you've always done or because the way you think it should be done. I guess what I would say is just, I think that you need to acknowledge that we're in a very dynamic world. So, what I would say is number one, use multiple job boards. Don't just stick to one. LinkedIn can be a very powerful platform, but there are tens or hundreds of other job boards out there you could also use. And a job is not going to be on all of them. So, I would recommend using multiple job boards. I would also recommend using every tool at your disposal. This could be doing things like continuing education. So, you need to look up websites like Coursera or Udemy or going back to school or whatever the case may be to affordably build up that skill set that people may want. Consider new certifications, things of that nature, new trainings. I would also say utilizing again what's at your disposal, looking up videos on YouTube that are more current. I don't recommend for this job market looking up a video from 5 years ago because it's probably not going to help very much. It may, but it may not. So I would say looking up and talking to people, calling up your local recruiting agencies. Not all of them are going to give you all the time you want, but it doesn't mean you won't find an agency that will. And they can tell you what they're seeing in the market in your specific area. You could even use things like AI to help you with writing your resume. Most people don't realize if you go to ChatGPT and you drop in some basics about your experience, it can write you a powerful resume. All you have to do is do some touch ups on formatting. And then I would say, lastly, is just put in the effort and the time, and it will pay off.
I want to make sure that we've covered this. But again, what are some resources that job seekers, or rather, what are some resources for job seekers to help them along the way so that they don't feel overwhelmed and exhausted? Because it is mentally draining to, look for a job and apply for a job.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing would be to keep your mental health in check, whether that be seeing a therapist or finding people that you can talk to. But if you feel like it's hopeless, then you're going to apply like it's hopeless. So making sure that you're keeping yourself in check, you're not just applying to whatever because you don't think you're worth it. Realize your own self worth, manage who you are, keep your house together first. And then I would say, there are plenty of resources online based on your industry. So there are tons of websites like Udemy who will offer amazing resources at a discount where you can learn different skills like programming or IT skills. You have Coursera online where you can learn different skills. They have classes on psychology topics, information technology. I mean, you name it. So I would say just keep yourself in check mentally and emotionally. And then I would also say that make sure that you're just continuing to try to build up a portfolio or a skill set that is going to be advantageous to you long term.
Okay, what was the site that you said? Udemy?
Correct. It's the letter udemy.com. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I have taken classes through them. And typically, you can find a considerable discount. And essentially, you can take classes on learning ChatGPT prompts, learning different programming languages. They have courses on like business development, finance and accounting, product design, personal development, lifestyle. It's very similar to Coursera. And I think a lot of other websites are starting to offer similar things where instead of spending thousands or tens of thousands on a degree, you can go and take some courses specifically about those topics and you could learn, you know what, I don't want to go for a computer science degree. I want to learn to develop this specific thing. You can go there and do it in a tenth of the time for a fraction of the cost. So, certain resources like that can definitely be valuable.
All right, we've been talking to Tyler Morgan on the current state of hiring and job seekers here in the US. Before we take off, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't discussed yet that maybe people need to know about?
No, honestly, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I think at the end of the day, I understand from being in this situation myself, but also from talking to others. So just I can't stress the importance of ensuring that your own mental health is at the forefront of your mind through this process, and that you realize that this situation, whether it be negative or potentially positive, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be this way forever. So prepare, plan, put the effort in, and it's going to work out.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Tyler, for taking the time to be here with us and to share your insights with everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.